Hey guys, it's me. I feel like I have not made a video in forever to put on YouTube. So I'm back tonight and we're going to chat about a lot of period questions, following up the post that I wrote today on the blog about how not having your period really isn't normal. Not having a normal period is not normal. And so I'll explain a little bit more about that too, because I feel like I got some questions too about maybe some medical abnormalities or things that are going on that might cause your period to go away. So I want to shed some light on that. And there were some questions in the comment section that I just felt like I wanted to dialogue about and answer a little bit more thoroughly instead of just type some things. And I just like chatting with you guys anyways rather than typing. So we are going to answer questions about that were in the comments. I'm also going to chat a little bit more about periods and that sort of thing. And then if any follow-up questions, you can email me at robyncoale@gmail.com. Alrighty, so first things first, I think it's important to just say, okay, what actually is a normal period? Because that's a very, very vague and a very, very broad question. And so what I usually tell clients and patients is that some people would say a regular period is 21 to 35 days. I typically like to see something more 25 to 35 day line. Typically, when you first start menstruating, let's say, 13, 14, 15, 16, even 17, maybe even a little bit later than that, or even definitely younger. We've seen actually little girls start menstruating younger and younger and younger, and that's actually because obesity is rising and rising and rising. And so once your body has enough body fat on it, typically that's when women start menstruating. And so as obesity levels rise among youth, we're starting to see girls starting their periods even earlier. So when you're younger, your periods can be longer. And I also say that to clients recovering from amenorrhea and patients too that I see in clinic, that if your periods are longer those first 1, 2, 3 times around, that's okay. What we want to see is that it trends a little bit closer and closer together. Now, somebody's normal is going to be very different based on the individual. But broadly speaking, we're saying around, some people say 21 to 35 days. I like to say 25 to 35 days. And a period can actually last as short as 2 days and up to a week. I would say if you're bleeding more than a week and it's really heavy and all of that, then that's probably concerning and something you should consult your healthcare provider with. If you get to 7 days and it's like some really just like, brown spotting, kind of nothing, like you're not even wearing anything, you might just find some spotting in your underwear when you go to the bathroom. I might not call that a day of bleeding, but something to still definitely bring up with your healthcare provider. I always tell patients, like, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And so I'd rather you ask me about it than not ask me about it. So anyways, that's kind of what we think about when we think about duration. Now, in terms of I wouldn't say heaviness, but like how light your period is to how heavy it is, if there's clotting, if there's not clotting, if you have cramps, if you don't have cramps, all those sorts of things are going to be different based on the woman. And so I would say normal is actually what is your normal, like what is your baseline, and that's going to be what's normal for you. If you're somebody who always has had 3-day periods, one, bless your soul, you're very fortunate, and that's awesome. If you're somebody who always tends towards a week or so, that's okay too. That can still be normal. Some clotting is actually normal, also in your period. But if you're finding yourself having really like tons of clotting, large clots, I would certainly go and ask your healthcare provider about that. I'm not gonna in this video say, oh, that's what that means, because I'm not going to diagnose people over a YouTube video. But I would say go consult your healthcare provider about that. If you're having super, 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 super dark blood, I would probably go consult your healthcare provider about that. Blood tends to be darker as your period goes on because that blood is older, right? Versus in the very beginning, your uterine lining is just shedding. It's the first few days that blood might be a little bit brighter. So there can be tons and tons of different variations. I would say, some abdominal cramping, some low back pain can be normal. If it is debilitating towards your regular life, that's concerning. Typically, painful menstruation, and I had a reader ask about this too, is typically because there's an imbalance of progesterone and estrogen. And so that needs to get worked out with the physician. I would not just put a blanket general statement and say, you're having painful Menstruation, not a problem. Let's just throw birth control on it. That needs to be dug in a lot deeper into and worked up to say, okay, this is something that we can fix with lifestyle, or perhaps there's some sort of structural issue, or there's some other medical pathology going on that perhaps it cannot be just fixed with nutrition and lifestyle. But the majority of irregular, and I say majority because that does not mean all, but common irregular bleeding and irregular menstruation can be fixed with lifestyle. I'll get into other things because I don't just want to throw a blanket statement over that and say, you have an irregular period, we can totally fix everything with lifestyle, because that would be irresponsible of me, right? So that answers that question. I had another question that asked how long it should take for your period to regulate after you come off of birth control. And any woman going through amenorrhea, and I get clients who have been on birth control for a really long time and they aren't menstruating, and I also get clients who just never menstruated ever in their entire life because they had anorexia or something else, some other sort of eating disorder or some other sort of issue going on when they were 13 or 14 when they should have menstruated, or they've just had an eating disorder or some other restrictive lifestyle habit, or they've been, they've gotten a divorce and changed careers and moved and all these other crazy stressful things. They haven't had a period in 3 years. Whatever it might be, if you're coming from amenorrhea, I tell clients that it can take a few months for their periods to actually become normal again. I like to see 3 periods in a row before, we change anything lifestyle-wise from what we were doing. And then your period should actually become normal. And you should start to be pretty rhythmic around that 6-month mark. That's based on research and tons of just anecdotal experience that I've had. But I had one person comment that their OB said they've been off birth control for 2 years and their periods are not regular, and she said that that's normal. Now, I don't want to throw any sort of healthcare provider under the bus, because we're, if you go into the healthcare profession, you obviously want to care for people. But I would say if you're not having regular periods and it's been 2 years, and I think she had been on birth control for 10 years, that's not necessarily normal, I would say. Some women can actually get off birth control and have their period the next month, but I would say to give it a full 6 months before you say, oh my gosh. But I would hope even within that 6 months, you'd have maybe 1 or 2, maybe even 3 irregular cycles, but then things might start getting rhythmic around that 6-month mark. So that might be something that actually needs to be dug into a little bit more. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit and see what other questions that we had in here. Another thing to note, I think, is on average, now I say on average because every woman is different, women actually on average menstruate around a BMI of 23. Now, I will tell you that most women walking the streets of New York especially do not have BMIs of 23. They're actually lower. When I wasn't menstruating, my BMI was much lower than it is now. It was still regular. I was in the normal range. It was on the lower end, but it wasn't where it is now. And so 23 is actually a BMI that by people we see in magazines, and a size 2 or a size 4 pant or whatever that crap that doesn't even matter means, is typically not a BMI of 23. So we have very false kind of expectations of what a healthy normal weight is, because the beauty ideals in our society are just like whack. And so that's not saying, I have women menstruate on a BMI of 19. I have girlfriends that are just naturally thin. They menstruate regularly. Some women have to menstruate on a BMI of a little bit higher. But I always throw out that number to kind of get some perspective on how our society has totally warped our minds in terms of what a woman should look like. Okay, so I had another reader ask a question about the mentality behind when exercise becomes unhealthy. So I think, first of all, it's a prioritization, right? Is your priority a healthy body who menstruates normally, or is your priority running a marathon or doing this XYZ workout regimen? Now, I will say, from my personal experience, this is mine. This is not anybody else's. This is mine. So you are you. But when I ran the New York City Marathon a couple of years ago, I menstruated every single month throughout that marathon training, because my sleep was great. My nutrition was on point. Life wasn't crazy stressful. But then, last winter I was finishing up school. Nick and I were wedding planning just this past winter, and I think I had an irregular month or 2. I track my period on an app. I recommend all my patients and clients do that. And that was more due to sleep and stress. sleep and stress tend to be things that actually cause my period to go away. It's not usually the nutrition or the exercise, now that I've kind of been able to learn what is good for my body. And so I would say, when does exercise become unhealthy? First, you have to figure out your priority, right? Is it to do this exercise routine, or is it to have a healthy menstrual cycle? And then second, I would ask myself, am I doing this because I think I should, or am I doing this because I want to? And those are two very, very different things, okay? Some people, I think one commenter commented in the comments that 4 days of CrossFit feels good to her. That's amazing. I know for me, 7 days of exercise doesn't feel good. I know 6 days of running doesn't feel good. And so do what's going to feel good for your body. And I would say that is a healthy mindset around exercise. Now, you might want to do something, but you know that your body doesn't menstruate, right? You might want to train for a marathon, but your body doesn't menstruate when you train for a marathon. Well, then that's when it comes back to the priority question, right? So that's a pretty complex question, but I think the main thing is to ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to, or am I doing this because I think I should? Because life's too short to do things that we actually don't want to do and that don't serve us and that don't feel good for our bodies. Go back to like maybe 2 weeks ago where I wrote that post. So I hope it answers that question. All right, there was a question about PCOS. So some abnormalities that might be causing your menstrual cycle to be irregular that actually need to be worked up and are medical problems. Things like PCOS. I've had clients, so many clients who have had PCOS, and we've restored their natural cycles. So that's a whole different video in and of itself, but that is possible. It also, the degree of, your PCOS and all of that, there is more milder conditions and more advanced. I would also say, uterine fibroids, things like cysts, things like PID, which is pelvic inflammatory disease. Those things are also going to cause irregular menstruation, and those would need to be worked up. There would have to be some blood work that would need to be drawn. Perhaps you go for a pelvic ultrasound, something else. There has to be further workup that your physician would do, or your nurse practitioner, or whoever your healthcare provider is, to be able to work that up further. And so you have to rule out those pathologies before you can say, okay, this is a lifestyle issue. Now, if somebody has a history of anorexia and they're over-exercising and all of that, I would probably not go working them up for PCOS, right? I would say, okay, this looks like the issue clinically, and let's focus on this. So I do want to shed light on that question, because I don't want people to think that my message is saying anything can be cured with lifestyle. There are medical issues and problems and those sorts of things that have to be further looked into and worked up with diagnostic testing by your healthcare provider to make sure we rule those things out. Okay, so there were a couple of other questions that I definitely wanted to answer. We talked about BMI. We talked about a few other things. One gal had asked, "Hey, I've had a normal cycle after recovering from anorexia for like 7 years ago. I've had a regular cycle for 5 to 6 years, and now it just went away. The only thing I can think of is I've increased my mileage." Well, if that's the only thing that's changed, then I would say maybe cut back on mileage and see if your period comes back. Different people have a different threshold for exercise. And so we have to be able to respect our own body's threshold, and to say, okay, if my body can't, even I might enjoy that activity, maybe I run, but I don't run that much. Maybe I choose different things that might still be enjoyable for me, but also might be healthy for my body. So I would say the biggest message I can give people is to never compare what you do with some other woman who is menstruating. I have friends who are much, have different body shapes than I do, and they menstruate just fine. And that's their body's natural shape, and that's wonderful. That's not me, and that's okay, because like everyone is created uniquely and beautifully because that's who you were created to be, and we're not all the same because that would be so boring. So learning to kind of embrace your natural shape, which is like a whole other loaded video. I love what Kylie Mitchell from I Mean Eat That says, where she says, I just want to embrace all the little fleshy bits, because that's so important. That's a huge step in this journey of kind of restoring your menstrual cycle and getting your body back to the natural weight it was always supposed to be at. Okay, I just want to scan through really quick to be able to make sure that I didn't miss any questions, which I don't think that I did. So my take-home message here would definitely be to say, okay, taking a look at nutrition, and that comes from a lot of different aspects of nutrition, eating early enough, eating often enough, you know, making sure you're nourishing your body well. Intuitive eating is a complex thing, meaning it's not just eat when you're hungry and stop with your full. There's lots of other factors that can determine what we eat, when we eat, and how much we eat. Stress obviously is huge. I totally get it. I feel like I've been under a lot of stress for the last 2.5, 3 years, but there's always little pockets of self-care that we can give ourselves. Exercising in a way that's appropriate for your body, and always eating enough at the end of the day is absolutely imperative. It's a journey. Be gentle with yourself. You don't need to get from 0 to 60 in one day. Get people in your boat to row along with you and to help you. And I think the more women that we can get talking about it, the healthier that we're going to be as a whole. So I hope that answered a lot of questions. If you have follow-up questions, email me. We can do more and more videos. And I hope you guys have an awesome week, end of your week and weekend. I'm working. I worked yesterday, and then I work Friday and Saturday. But that's okay, because it's snowing here. And so if it's not sunny and beautiful, I might as well be at work. Not really, but it makes work a little bit easier. So anyways, I hope you guys have an awesome weekend. And email me if you have any other questions or follow-up questions. I love answering them. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon.